Yesterday we had the privilege of some time with Anna. Part of our ministry is these days when we have somebody who's going to go, we spend a lot of time with them. And man, have we enjoyed spending time with Anna, seeing how she's growing and developing toward what she's going to, and just to recognise the quality young woman that she is. So if you see any more like her, that's the kind of people we're looking for. And I'm sure you've seen her prayer card. We have some on the table today as well. We also have an ETHNOS newsletter that we can say a little bit more about her than what she can. If you'd like to get on that, we do it every 2 months, you can get that hard copy for free or online PDF. I forgot to put a sheet there, but somebody could put a sheet there and you could sign up. We can do that. We have a bunch of other materials. This is a fantastic little tract for evangelism, who is God, and it comes with little QR codes that link to little videos. Fantastic resource. It's really condensed chronological teaching, creation to Revelation. And for those of you who don't know much about ETHNOS New Zealand, we have a lot of videos on our website, but take that card, have a look. It's a 30-minute video, and it will give you a really good overview of the bigger picture of what Anna's going to do. We also have some magazines. Feel free to take one of those. So there's all that promo out of the way. It's actually good we're here today and Anna's not. We didn't plan it that way. Originally, she was going to be here, but it's actually good she's not, because we can say a few more things that won't embarrass her because she won't hear it. So anyway, I think that's turned out for good. Now, as you know, a big part of our ministry from previous visits we've shared, and a big part of our ministry is to make an awareness of ETHNOS New Zealand. And one of the ways that we do this is through what we call our interface program that we are a part of leading each June and July. And this is, you've heard us talk about it before, where we take young people to Papua New Guinea and we expose them for 5 to 6 weeks on what it's like to reach unreached people groups. And to refresh your memory, here's a very short preview of this. We can't wait to get back there in June and July, and for anybody else who wants to come, we have some of these cards there. If you know somebody that would be interested, there's a card there. We can't wait to get back there and let more young people see how God could possibly use them in missions. And this year we are super excited because Anna is coming with us. And so what you saw there is what she's going to be in the middle of for over 5 weeks. And for her, it's going to become part of her orientation as she continues to serve the Lord there afterwards. We have 2 more young guys from here in New Zealand coming with us as well, so that's really good for New Zealand. 3. The program is already at capacity for young women, but we do have a few more spaces for young guys. So again, if you know somebody 18 and upwards that is maybe interested in this, we would love to hear from them. Time is fast running out for applications for that. So just a few more guys. This will be probably the biggest trip. We can take 31 people from all around the world. Now, as you know, part of our ministry is to bring an awareness of missions, but what you may not know is the challenge that can be to get into new churches to share about it. So to gain invites, there's been times where I've been crazy enough to suggest, well, let us come and we'll fit into a theme that you're doing or a series. And one time I had a church reply and say, yes, that will work. We're going through the book of Joshua chapter by chapter. You can speak into that. Chapter 21. Chapter 21, what's that all about? No way. That is about the allocation of 48 towns for the Levites, all listed out one by one. What on earth was I thinking to be so stupid to offer to do something like that? Anyway, how does something like that fit into ETHNOS New Zealand's vision statement of a thriving church for every people? Or how does that fit into any local church that meets week by week? So come with me and let's find out in what I have titled Scattered to Bless. And we are going to uncover this from a chapter that's easily overlooked because of its many lists. And like what happens so often in Scripture, we are blessed if we dig down deep. You as a church know that from the teaching you get here, right? When we dig right down, we are super blessed. And I sure was, and I was blessed enough to modify my original and share this with you today. So, let's get a little bit of context. Chapter 21 concludes the settlement process of Canaan. The land has largely been conquered and now it's divided out among the 12 tribes as you see here on this map here. And you'll notice on that map that there is an absence of territory assigned to Levi. And this follows God's directive as Moses records in Deuteronomy 18 verse 1. The priests who are Levites, indeed the whole tribe of Levi, are to have no allotment or inheritance with Israel. And so this is the point. This is the context for us. We come into chapter 21 and reading from verse 1. Now the family heads of the Levites approached Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the heads of the other tribal families of Israel at Shiloh in Canaan and said to them, "The Lord commanded through Moses that you give us towns to live in with pasture lands for our livestock." So this is no angry demand of the Levites. They're just stating what God had promised them, and we can read that in Numbers 35 verses 1 to 8. But we'll carry on with verse 3. So as the Lord had commanded, the Israelites gave the Levites the following towns and pasture lands out of their own inheritance. And then from verse 4 all the way down to verse 42, we find all of the towns are listed, and here you go, there's a representation of all 48 of them. And like many Hebrew lists, we may need to read it and reread it a few times to get our Western minds around what's been communicated through it. Now, the first thing that we need to grip hold of here in verses 4 to 8 is how the Levites are divided among Levi's 3 sons, Gershon, Kohath and Merari. But then a careful look at verse 4 reveals that the Kohathite clan is actually divided into 2 groups. So you have the priests descended from Aaron, and then you have the rest of the non-priest Kohathites. So that makes 2 groups. And then we add in the Gershonite and the Merarite clans. And this is how the Levites became divided into 4 groups. Each is allocated their towns, and then through verses 9 to 42 we get all the detail name by name of all these towns, and just have a look at all those names. This is the sort of thing that would be fun to get a mouthful of dry Weet-Bix and try and say it. So you can try that at home later, right? But this list is important because this forms a legal record of all the allocated towns for the Levites. Now, if we step back a little from this, we will also begin to see that this is a new beginning for the whole nation. See, for the first time in their history, they now have a place to call their own. Remember, within 50 years before this time, their parents' generation were slaves under a tyrant pharaoh in Egypt. And then because of that generation's unbelief, this generation bore the consequences by becoming nomadic desert dwellers. And none of them, except Joshua and Caleb, are older than about 70. So the huge majority of them were born in the desert, and now here they are fulfilling God's promise to their ancestor Abraham from 700 years earlier, a land of their own. This is also a new beginning for all the Levites. For them, during the desert, all those years of desert wandering, they had their place in the camp tightly grouped together surrounding the tabernacle. The tabernacle was the centre of the Israelite camps, and the Kohathite Aaronic priests, they were camped at the eastern front end of the tabernacle. The rest of the non-priest Kohathites, they were all together on the south side, and then the Gershonite clans, they were along the western wall, and the Merarite clans, they were on the north. So this had the Levites all tightly clustered around the tabernacle, which is all very practical for them to perform their duties of service and also their responsibilities for moving it and its furnishings as they travelled. But now that they were in the land, the tabernacle was permanently established in Shiloh. So this greatly reduced their workload, since they would no longer be needed to pull up stakes and move it, like during the desert wanderings. So this raises a question: why would God change the order that he had previously established and now scatter them among the 12 tribes? So let's have a look at 3 reasons for this. And the first one is prophetic. A fulfillment of prophecy made by Jacob some 450 years earlier. In Genesis chapter 49, when Jacob had gathered his sons around his deathbed for his farewell blessing, it's more of a curse that he pronounces for Simeon and Levi. Earlier on in Genesis chapter 34, there is the account of their massacre of the men at Shechem, and it's to this that God calls them to account through Jacob when he says, "Their swords are weapons of violence. They have killed men in their anger and hamstrung oxen as they pleased. Cursed be their anger so fierce and their fury so cruel. And because of all that, here it is, I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel." So this is what we could call a forgotten reason or a consequence why the Levites are being scattered. And as a side, you'll notice on the map there that there is no land allocation to Simeon. As we are told in Joshua 19 verse 1 and verse 9, Simeon's inheritance lay within the territory of Judah. So this is a good reminder for us today that nothing goes unnoticed by God. All kinds of injustices abound, weapons of violence and wars and senseless invasions, biological gender that's become hamstrung to please a wicked and adulterous generation, and then the fierce and cruel killing of thousands of unborn. We can be sure that none of that goes unnoticed by God. None of that and more. Justice will be served because mankind is accountable. 1 Peter 4:5 could not be clearer. They will have to give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. Not just the overt wickedness of the ungodly, but as believers, we too must guard against that covert wickedness that lurks within our old nature. In Colossians 3, Paul does not mince his words as to what that is. Sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, greed, which is idolatry, anger, rage, malice, slander, filthy language, lying. Verse 6, because of these, the wrath of God is coming. You used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived, but now you must rid yourselves of all such things. If we don't, as believers at the Bema judgment seat of rewards, we will be brought to account on those things and suffer loss. Anyway, getting back to the Levites, realising the lack of their own territory, it would have been easy for them to grumble and complain about the fact that they were scattered. Why them? It wasn't them who aroused God's wrath all those years earlier. And we too can easily look at the lot that we have in life, and when we compare ourselves to others, think that God is unfair or that we are living someone else's consequences. But like one commentator has said, if we get a hold of what's going on here, it liberates us. It will prove to be a blessing to us and to those around us. Instead of questioning God's purposes, we can delight in serving Him wherever we are at. If we dig a little here, we will find the incredible grace of God at work as the main reason for their dispersion. And in only a way that God can, He brings good out of the bad. And He didn't flip-flop on what He had prophesied through Jacob, but He turns that very situation around to bless all of Israel. And that becomes the basis for the second reason for scattering the Levites. It was substitution. You see, they had become the adopted substitutes for the firstborn of the entire nation of Israel. God, speaking to Moses in Numbers 3:12 and 13, says, I have taken the Levites from among the Israelites in place of the male offspring of every Israelite woman. The Levites are mine, for all the firstborn are mine. When I struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, I set apart for myself every firstborn in Israel. So as a representation for all the firstborn, God was giving the Levites positions of service set apart for His purpose and for His glory. And so now, and here's the blessing, by being scattered, they would be accessible to positively influence those that they lived amongst. Moses, in his final prophetic blessing of the tribes, said of Levi, He teaches your precepts to Jacob and your law to Israel. This was now their amended responsibility, to instruct people, to instruct Israel in the law of God and to maintain a knowledge of His word among the people. Someone has estimated that no one in Israel lived more than about 16 kilometres from one of these Levite towns. Therefore, like my Bible knowledge commentary points out, every Israelite had nearby a man well versed in the law of Moses who could give advice and counsel in the many problems of religious, family and political life. The potential for good among the tribes was almost unlimited. And now that's similar for us. That's a great picture of the church's responsibility for outreach, discipleship and missions as we live scattered amongst the world. As Christians, we have more, like the Levites, we are well versed in more than the law of Moses. We have the gospel of grace, and our potential for good among those around us is almost unlimited. But this does mean that missions and evangelism is to be focused outside of the church. Not like the old model where the Levites were all clustered around the tabernacle. If we stay clustered around the church, it will be harder to reach the lost. If we stay clustered around the church, we will not even know that there are those out there who are asking to hear the word of God. In Papua New Guinea, our ETHNOS missionaries planted a church among the Iski people in 2017. From then till last year, so for 5 years, they had a continual stream of delegates from a neighbouring people group called the Kaminimang. And there they are. They don't speak the Iski language, but month by month, through interpreters, they were requesting missionaries to come to their village, learn their language, and teach them God's story. These people are asking because of the difference seen in the lives of the Iski people since the gospel took root there. As the Iski church matured, last year our missionaries began to survey this need with a view to sending missionaries. As they hiked through the village, each village of this tribe, they said this: "We were greeted by countless people with fruits, tobacco, and betel nut." So those are the traditional tribal gifts you would give. These people would express to us, through an interpreter, that they are scared and do not know where their spirit will end up when they die. Who will tell us God's story? That's what they said. Indeed, who will? See, this takes someone who will be scattered to go and bless these people. That's what God is asking of Christians all around the world. Just our organisation alone has people scattered through 33 countries, like you see here. This is why Peter talks about us becoming like aliens and strangers in the world. And in 1 Peter 2:9 he says, "You are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light." You see, that's why ETHNOS, New Zealand, that's why we're looking for those from this royal priesthood who are willing to become aliens and strangers in the world and go and serve in missions. Is that what Anna is? Part of that royal priesthood who's willing to go? When we lived and served in the Philippines, we were forever reminded of this when we had to renew our visas at the Alien Control Office. Seriously, that's what they called it. Our kids had great imaginations of little green guys with 3 eyes and antennae sitting behind desks, but it was us that were the aliens in a foreign land. It's that alienation to missions that saw us leave a successful, thriving business in New Zealand to become career missionaries. However it was that God wanted to use us, starting in the jungles of the Philippines. And now today, and that's our amazing house there, and now today the Lord has us based out in New Zealand as we lead, as we administrate, and as we mobilise people through ETHNOS New Zealand. It's this alienation to missions that sees the likes of Anna preparing to go and serve in Papua New Guinea, using her medical skills to keep our missionaries in country with quality medical care. Our main centre where she will be serving has this medical clinic. This also serves the local community. As well, there are times where our medical personnel will conduct tribal clinics to help support our church planters. These bush blitzes are really intense. They are like nothing that we see here. There are also times that our doctors and nurses will accompany patients in medevacs across to Cairns. So this is some of what Anna is potentially involved in. Without all the resources of home, Anna is going to be medically extended, but she's going to be a huge part of supporting the church planting initiative. That is the reason why we are there in the first place. And by the way, our organisation is desperate for more doctors. We are desperate worldwide for more teachers in multiple countries, many of the other professions, tradespeople as well. Maybe there's someone here. It just starts with that, how can I help? Or maybe you know somebody who might be interested in this. Please let them know. Maybe you could pray that the Lord would bring them across our path, praying for them and all of the challenges that they will have to leave all this behind and to go there and then to stay there. Huge amount of challenges, and you can put Anna right in there. She's looking to build a serious prayer partner base, and today she's in Matamata. That was of her own doing. Over the next pretty much till she goes, apart from all of April, she's going to be with us in different churches that we've been able to arrange, where she can profile what she's going to be doing. So pray for her, that people would get on board and sign up to pray for her. The Lord would raise up that support base behind her. If you're not on her update list, her personal one, as a church, that would be a really good idea. And like I said before, you can get the outside gossip from us. But yeah, it's really important. As a home church, you should know the most about her out of anybody. She'll certainly have to be strong and courageous like Joshua and his people. Now, this is not just for missionaries. This is for all of us as Christians living amongst New Zealand's rapid descent into a huge depravity that we're seeing. What used to be more the experience that foreign missionaries would be living amongst and dealing with is now commonplace everywhere. This is a hostile world. There is so much blatant evil out there amongst those who have less and less knowledge of God. So whether we continue to live here or whether we follow the Lord to a foreign field, it will be against the tide of personal pursuits to do that. It isn't easy. We can't do it in our own strength, and nor can we do it on our own. And especially in missions, this is highlighted by the need of that wider team. And then this leads to another reason why the Levites were scattered. It was all about provision. They were about the Lord's business and not their own. They could not support themselves in farming or industry like their brothers from the other tribes. Theirs was a ministry among the people, and it was those people that were to support them. Deuteronomy 18:1-8 lays out how God expected Israel to provide not just for the priests, but the whole tribe of Levi. They shall live on the offerings made to the Lord by fire, for that is their inheritance. And then those verses go on to list out the parts of the animal sacrifices that were to be given to them, as well as the first fruits of the grain, the new wine and oil, and the first wool shorn from the sheep. And the reason is given to us in verse 5. For the Lord your God has chosen them and their descendants out of all your tribes to stand and minister in the Lord's name always. And then in verse 8, they are to share equally in Israel's benefits. This is what we see today in the Christian church. For many Christian churches, they have a paid pastor or two supported by their people. This is what we see in missions, but it comes with a real twist, because in missions, it's never the unreached who support their missionary. The missionary is like the Levite, scattered amongst those who they are reaching, but sent by the local home church. So I want to thank you for the support that you are, what we're seeing already for Anna. Missions is costly, and because most New Zealand churches are too small to fully support their missionary, that's why they need additional support from other churches and individuals. And like I mentioned, that's what we're trying to do to help. It's been encouraging with some of the interest that we've already seen as we bring the awareness of Anna and how the Lord's leading her to Papua New Guinea. Actually, it's exciting to see what God does, because we see the background, some of what's going on. In most places that our missionaries work, they cannot engage in full-time employment to keep themselves there. First up, it would be illegal. Second up, their ministry is full-time plus. Thirdly, God has made a way for more than just those that could go to be a part of what he's doing through their prayers and their finances as their gifts of sacrifice to the Lord. We better get back to chapter 21 here. We can't leave this with just the Levites and their towns, because in the last 3 verses of this chapter, it's really a conclusion of where the whole book is heading. They conclude Israel's conquest of the land, And it could even be seen as a climax to the whole book. So let's read the last 3 verses from verse 43. So the Lord gave Israel all the land he had sworn to give their forefathers, and they took possession of it and settled there. The Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn their forefathers. Not one of their enemies withstood them. The Lord handed all their enemies over to them. Not one of the Lord's good promises to the house of Israel failed. Every one was fulfilled. What strikes me here is how the Lord, he gave and he gave and he gave. Did they deserve it? No. And that's the same for us. In view of God's holiness, we don't deserve anything either. But he has, he gave what he promised because his word is sure. And he gives us what's promised because his word is sure. See, for them, he had sworn by oath again and again to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, and then to Moses and to Joshua, and it happened just as he promised. To me, this language drips like honey, right? It's land of milk and honey, and these words are dripping like honey. A sworn possession, a settled rest, enemies handed over, every promise fulfilled. See, God did exactly what he said he would do in Joshua 1:3. I will give you every place where you set your foot as I promised Moses. And why wouldn't he? As David says in Psalm 119, 89 and 90, your word, O Lord, is eternal. It stands firm in the heavens. Your faithfulness continues through all generations. We're talking about God's character here. It's all about God's faithfulness. And that's why all these generations later, us today, we can trust him no matter what's going on around us and whatever he's called us to do. We have Jesus' promise, and this is particularly applicable for Anna. We have Jesus' promise, Matthew 6:31 to 33. Do not worry saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. You know, Julie and I have personally seen the Lord supply everything we have needed for the last 27 years. With our ministry, it's impossible for us to earn an income. And month by month, we have no idea of what will come in. But it's always been enough. There's been times with some incredible needs right in our face. Early on in our time in the Philippines, there was this young guy, JR. He was the son of one of Judy's friends, and he'd been knocked off his motorbike. He'd been sent home to live the rest of his life as a cripple because the family didn't have any finances. We were appalled at his condition, and it just blew us away that his was a fixable condition that just needed the funds for an orthopaedic surgeon and a hospital. So because of Judy's friendship, we felt convicted we should help this guy, get him into the hospital, even though we didn't have the funds, but trusting that the Lord would provide. By the time that hospital bill became due, we had received the exact amount from a friend in Australia who had no idea of what was going on. Right when we needed it, God provided the money. And that's just one of many, many stories I could share of God's faithfulness. Thank you for helping Anna on a journey where she is going to experience God's faithfulness. If any of us are scattered to bless God's purposes wherever that is, we can trust our faithful God to provide all we need. So as we conclude today, how do we see the faithfulness of God? Have we lived, or are we living, to prove God's faithfulness in our lives? Or are we hanging on to our lives so tight that there's little room for him to show it? See, this is a growing process to see God's faithfulness reach full bloom in our lives. The question is, if we're getting on, can we say that we own God's faithfulness from our life experiences? God wants to be showing faithful through our lives. The encouragement for us today, regardless whatever we are facing, God remains faithful. And just like he turned those ancient consequences around to bring a blessing through the Levites' accessibility, we too are recipients of God's grace to be scattered to bless others. Totally possible because of God's unfailing faithfulness. As we go home today, let's look how we can bless others, and we can do so by clinging to God's character and confidently living out Joshua 1:9. Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So thank you, Lincoln, for having us here. Thank you all for your smiles. That was really good. And yeah, again, thanks for letting us bring God's word.